to episode 11 of Gone Mental. This episode we're going to talk about the importance of getting a good GP in mental health.
Yep, I'm Andrew and I'm going to probably do most of the talking in this one.
I'm Christy.
Yes, that's right. For me, I think my story is probably an illustration of just how important it is to have a proper GP. Now, I was a very sick child and I chatted a lot with doctors. By the time I was 8, I could talk about them as equals. So I've never had any fear of the health system. I like doctors, I like hospitals, I've never been afraid of operations. So whenever I had some sort of problem, I go straight to the GP and I'll refer to a specialist if I need one. I was diagnosed with bipolar type 2 in 2005, just under 10 years ago. Now I'm going to contrast that with a similar time in my life in 1995, which was 10 years before that. Now in 1995 I had probably my only major depressive episode for a bunch of reasons which I might do a separate podcast on. But I was very depressed, I was feeling I had no energy, and I had terrible trouble sleeping. So I went to a GP and I said, give me some sleeping tablets. He prescribed Mogadon, which at the time everyone in Australia knew what Mogadon was. In the 80s and the 90s it was the very well-known sleeping tablet. They were known as Moggies, everyone knew what they were. And I was warned that they had possible side effects. I could expect muscle stiffness, I could expect severe headaches if they went wrong. I took them, I had no side effects at all, I got wonderful relieving sleep. That was great. 10 years later, in 2005, I had what I call a controlled nervous breakdown. It was basically a 2-week panic attack. And of course, I couldn't sleep. I had elevated blood pressure, I had elevated heart rate, and it just wouldn't go down. I was wide-eyed, very alert. I couldn't sleep. I went to the doctor and asked for the sleeping tablets, as I had done 10 years before that. Now this time he said to me, okay, I will give you, this was a different doctor, by the way, I'd moved to Sydney by this time, and I'd gone to see a doctor who happened to have some previous experience as, I think he was a psychiatric consultant. He'd worked with people with mental illnesses before. He said to me, okay, I'll give you some tablets, but half jokingly he said you should consider getting a psychiatric diagnosis. Now that's the first time a doctor had ever said that to me. Bear in mind that my mother and my grandmother both had bipolar type 1. They had been repeatedly hospitalised in psych wards and was very well known. But this was the first time anyone suggested that I get a psychiatric diagnosis. So I took the first sleeping tablets, which were like, drink a glass of water. So I went back to the doctor and said, can you give me something stronger? And he said, well, yes, but a bit more seriously, I think you should consider a psychiatric diagnosis. So I took some Stilnox, which were quite strong. They worked for a couple of nights, but then they stopped working. So I went back and said, with rather a lot of trepidation, okay, what are the options for stronger? He said, well, I can give you Normicin. Now, a number of people have told me that Normicin is quite a heavy drug. It's like taking a sledgehammer. A couple of other people have said, oh, it's nothing much. They've tried it quite a lot. But the doctor said, I can give it to you, but I've got to warn you it has side effects. So what are you talking about? He said, short-term memory loss. I asked him, will it get me to sleep? He said, yes, it will definitely get you to sleep. I value my memory quite a lot. I have an excellent memory. I hardly ever forget things, and I rely very much on it. I'm an A-grade control freak, and part of that is I remember stuff. So I said, short-term memory loss, no, I'm going to get the psychiatric diagnosis instead. The doctor told me he thought it was probably bipolar. He said yes, like your mum. I think he got fairly much the same thing. I was quite shocked. But I was referred to outpatients, which Christy has talked about in the previous episode. I was fortunate enough to get a consultant psychiatrist who agreed with the diagnosis. And let me see, I was put on antidepressant medication by the GP. It was confirmed by the psychiatrist, who also put me on antipsychotic medication, even though I have bipolar type 2 and I don't have psychotic episodes. I'll go into this in more detail in a separate podcast. But for me, this is an illustration of having the right GP. I happen to go to, and this is almost happenstance, I happen to go to a GP who had significant experience about people with mental illness. There's also something else that happened between 1995 and 2005. In 2002, the Howard government brought in the half a dozen free referrals, and where people could be referred to specialists, for instance, allied health professionals, it's a physiotherapist, people like that, including psychiatrists and psychologists. Also, around that time, they gave all GPs basic, it's probably something like mental health first aid, warning signs to look for indications of mental illness, and the number one warning sign was disturbed sleep. Now, I presented in 1995 with disturbed sleep, and what I got was sleeping tablets, which I asked for. In 2005, I presented with disturbed sleep. I got the sleeping tablets, but I also got a warning, which led to a diagnosis. That's for me is the importance of having the right GP. I don't know how many hundreds of doctors I'd seen before this guy picked me up.
For me, I love my doctor. I've been seeing the same doctor since I was first. The first time I saw him was immediately after I came out of hospital. My parents had took referrals.
You mean when you were 22 and you had your episode?
So came straight out of the psych hospital to see him, and his wife practiced in the same practice. That was very convenient for pap smears and things like that. My parents had looked around for a good GP and took recommendations from friends. We are so lucky.
You researched it?
Well, it was before the internet, and all it was referrals. My parents knew we wanted a new GP after the medical centre had denied to see me, even though they had my files.
They had denied?
Referred me to the hospital because it was like 10 minutes before closing time. So
they were too busy to see.
Yes, and my doctor wasn't on at the time, so they just sent me to the hospital. They locked the doors, couldn't let us in, and sent me to the hospital.
So you're a dangerous patient.
So because of that, I was psychotic and I was out of control. But
I see. No.
Okay.
So they were scared of you.
Maybe, I don't know. But anyway, my family felt that my doctor, I should have been seen by that clinic because I'd been under the care of that doctor for a long time. Anyway, he is still a very good doctor, but I don't like medical centres, and that's just my personal preference. I like doctors who have their own surgery, so you're guaranteed to see the same person and know that that person's on all of the operating hours.
And Christy we have just made a previous podcast about re-traumatisation, about having to retell your story to different people. So that's still quite a big issue.
For me, that's
one of the reasons.
Huge. And I love and trust my doctor. I know that's probably crossing a line somewhere, but he's like an uncle that I can always confide in. And he helps me manage my bipolar. He's a very experienced older doctor, and just from that experience and from being a great GP, he knows a great deal about mental health. And he also...
You probably taught him quite a lot about bipolar and mental illness in general.
I hope so, but He lives in an area where there's a lot of consumers, and because he is so good, he makes sure he's up to date on things that affect his consumers. He also gets on the phone to his friends, some of his friends who are psychiatrists.
He phones a friend.
He does,
Wow.
and he discusses your symptoms with you in the room, and says, what should we prescribe under this situation? He knows that I don't want to see a psychiatrist at the moment, but I'm happy seeing him. So he goes the extra mile. He doesn't make notes about me that I can't read. He will let me read my notes.
And he has legible handwriting, does he?
No, but that's another issue.
So does he type them up for you?
No, but if I want to, but it's about access. He doesn't prevent my access to his notes. He doesn't make notes that he feels are too personal, because he says, I can remember that stuff, or you can tell me that stuff. Again, because he doesn't want that written on a file that could end up somewhere one day. And I appreciate the fact that I feel that with him on my side, and his wife too was a lovely doctor, she's now retired, I don't need a psychiatrist. That will change when I get pregnant, because I want somebody who specialises in pregnancy and bipolar. I've already found a psychiatrist. But until then, and he'll always, as long as he keeps operating, I'll be very sad when he's gone. But I'd also say that my partner has a very good GP, and one of the things that impresses me is she writes down a mental health plan. She has everything ready, so she just has to get one. So a lot of my plan with Dr. Tony is unwritten, and we both like it that way. That if I was changing to another doctor, I'd write one that writes out a proper mental health plan. And I think I'm in a very privileged position, because I have the education to know what to look for. I would like to ask Andrew, what would you look for if you were looking for a GP now?
I've never researched the GP the way you have. I generally just turn up. It's not so much of an issue for me because, as I said, I've been talking to doctors as equals. If I happen to run across a GP I don't think is doing their job, I will either tell them or I'll go to another GP. So it's not really an issue for me.
So you don't have a continuous relationship with the one GP?
I do. I've had a current GP for about 4 years. This chap was even good enough to, when I moved from one suburb to another, he moved shortly after, so maybe he did it just for me. So I have a very good GP at the moment, but that was probably sheer luck. I'm not sure.
Another issue is that I did mention in the re-traumatisation video we did before this one, is people who've been victims of child sex abuse or child abuse in any form, and even domestic violence or that. It's very good to get a GP that's trained in trauma-informed care. They're rare, they're hard to find, but I think it's worth getting that. And
I think, Kirsty, you better do a separate podcast on that, because that's a huge area. It's an emerging area. It's only just becoming something that's good. What am I trying to say?
It's new.
It's a new coming thing, and it's a very welcome development.
Yeah. And my point to bringing it up now, and I will talk about trauma-informed care at a later date in more detail, probably with Andrew, because I'd like his reinforcement. I can get the research material. But I would say that Adult Survivors of Child Abuse has a website, and they list trauma-informed GPs on their website. If not, you can call them. They have a 24-hour phone line for counselling, and they can refer you to a trauma-informed GP. Unfortunately, they want to grow that number, but they are in short supply. That can help with re-traumatisation. If you have a doctor who's well trained in trauma-informed care, I believe they're almost certainly going to also be well trained in mental health, because the two, unfortunately, often go together.
Very much. Okay, we'll sign off for today. Thank you very much. Give us your feedback.
Thank you, bye.
Right. Okay. Here's the stop button.